Well, tonight we're going to look at Luke chapter 7, verses 7 through 17 as we make our journey through this book. We're in the big section of Jesus' ministry in Galilee. That's where Jesus' ministry started. And for the most part, his ministry in Galilee goes very well. There's the little bump in the road when he went to Nazareth. But other than that, he's greatly welcomed by the people. He becomes very popular. His following continues to grow wherever he goes. And he will stay in Galilee until Luke chapter 9, verse 51, when Jesus says, I must go to Jerusalem. And he will make that journey to the capital city of Israel. We began this new section last week, the miracles of Jesus, and we find those in chapter 7, verses 1 through 50. And there's actually 3 miracles in this chapter. And the interesting thing is these miracles involve people that many Jewish people considered to be outcasts. The first one is a Roman centurion, a Roman military officer, a Gentile. And many Jewish people wanted nothing to do with Gentiles. The second story, which we'll also look at tonight, involved a widow. And a widow in Jewish society just had no position whatsoever. She was totally dependent upon her husband and her children to take care of her. And then the third story, which we'll get to soon, is about a sinful woman, which women in the first century, they were kind of at the bottom of the social chart as well, especially a sinful woman that people would want to stay away from. So it's interesting as we unfold this gospel. We talked about Jesus' relationship with the crowds, and the crowds love him for the most part. Jesus also has some critics. Jesus has a different understanding of Jewish law and how that should be lived out than the scribes and the Pharisees. Then we looked at Jesus and his disciples. Jesus calling the 12 and training them and teaching them. And now we have Jesus and social outcasts. How will Jesus treat people who are on the fringes of society? How will Jesus treat people that many other people will either ignore, overlook, or think has no value? How will Jesus treat those people? And these 3 miracle stories will help us unpack that. Right in the middle of this chapter, and we'll look at this next week, is a section about John the Baptist. We left John the Baptist way back a few chapters ago in prison. And now that John's been in prison, he's been hearing rumors and stories about Jesus, and he wants to know the answer to this question. Is Jesus really the Messiah, or should we look for somebody else? Which is kind of interesting because he baptized Jesus. He identified Jesus as the Messiah, but being in prison for a while has raised some questions, and Jesus is going to answer those questions. We began last week by talking about this story of the healing of the centurion servant. And I left you with a cliffhanger because I only got through half the story. So let me quickly review it, and we'll pick up where we left off. So Jesus had finished saying all this to the people. We're talking about Jesus giving the Sermon on the Plain in Luke chapter 6, which was a very difficult sermon, especially when you try to apply it. And Jesus finishes that sermon probably on one of the hills just outside of Capernaum. And he leaves there and goes into the village of Capernaum itself, where he meets a centurion servant, or at least he's going to be told about this man. This servant was greatly valued by his master, but he was sick and about to die. And it's interesting how Luke sets this up. And it's a very important story because Luke was written by a Gentile, and it was written to Gentiles. This is a story about a Gentile. This Roman centurion, this Roman military officer is a Gentile. And the question becomes, how is Jesus going to treat this man? Because a lot of Jewish people wanted nothing to do with Gentiles. They kind of shunned the Gentiles. They were not people of the covenant. They were not the people of God. So many Jewish people wanted nothing to do with Gentiles. Would Jesus feel that way, or would Jesus treat him differently? Well, this man has a servant whom he loves, and the servant's about to die, and the man's looking for some answers. So, interestingly enough, the centurion has heard about Jesus. Well, he lives in Capernaum. Jesus has done many, many miracles in Capernaum. And so it's no surprise that this centurion has at least heard about Jesus. And so he goes to the elders of the Jews. And immediately we have an interesting picture. Jews and Gentiles are actually getting along. The Jewish people are not shunning this Gentile. Because keep in mind, this guy works for the Roman government. He works for the Roman army. The Jews, for the most part, are looking for a Messiah who will gather up an army and kick the Romans out of their country. And this is one of the ones they want to kick out. But in Capernaum, this Roman military officer and the leaders of the Jews in that community actually get along, which Luke kind of sends a message to the Christian church. Jews and Gentiles can get along. And in the Christian church in the first century, often you had Jewish Christians and Gentile Christians in the same church. And they needed to get along, even though the cultural barriers between the two of them were really great, as we unpack this story. So the centurion goes to the leaders of the Jews and says, "Can you ask Jesus to come and heal my servant?" In other words, I'm not going to go to Jesus and bother him, but can you go on my behalf and convince Jesus to come to my house and heal my servant? And they say, yeah, we can do that. So they come to Jesus and they plead with Jesus because maybe they're not sure how Jesus would respond to a Roman centurion either. I mean, would Jesus even be interested in helping this man? So they plead with Jesus. They even say this man deserves it, meaning he's a good Gentile. Talk about an oxymoron for a Jewish person in the first century. You know, good Gentile, good Roman. Many Jews said, no, those two words don't go together. But they convinced Jesus that Jesus should do something. And they give Jesus two reasons. First one, he loves our nation. Now, the people of Israel at this point really were not a nation. They were not an independent nation. They were under the Roman government. So this most likely means that this Roman loves Jewish people. It's quite possible that this Roman centurion was what we call a God-fearer. And that was kind of a technical term that's also used in the book of Acts, meaning he's a Gentile, but he has embraced the Jewish faith. He goes to the Jewish place of worship, the synagogue. He's learning the Jewish stories. He's learning the Hebrew Bible. He is believing in the God of the Hebrews, but he's not quite ready to convert to Judaism. And many of the Gentile men did not want to convert to Judaism because that involved circumcision. And they said, thanks, but no thanks. I'll just remain a God-fearer. So it's quite possible that this Gentile military officer is a God-fearer. He believes in the same God that the Jewish people believe in. And he loves the Jewish people. He attends their synagogue. He's friends with them. And not only that, he helped build the synagogue. He gave some of his own money so that the Jewish people could build the synagogue in Capernaum. So Jesus agrees. He's going to go with them, which means that Jesus is going to go into the home of a Gentile, which is against Jewish ceremonial law. So if you're a Jewish man and you walk into the home of a Gentile, you become unclean according to Jewish law. And you had to purify yourself once you did such a horrible thing. And not only that, by going into the home of a Gentile, Oh, the religious leaders of Israel are not going to like that. You're going to be criticized severely for doing such a thing. But yet it appears that Jesus is willing to do this. He goes with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to him to say, Lord, don't trouble yourself. I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. Raises a couple of questions. What's the man's real motivation? And one possible motivation is he begins to think, especially if he attends Jewish synagogue, if Jesus comes inside my house, the religious leaders are going to throw a fit. They're going to criticize Jesus. And I don't want that to happen to Jesus. So maybe Jesus should not come inside my house. Or it could be that he has such respect for Jesus that he thinks he's unworthy to have Jesus come to his house. So it either involves ceremonial laws of the Jews or a sense of personal unworthiness, which, according to the politics of the day, this man's a Roman military officer. He's got political clout. Jesus is a Jew. Jesus has no political clout. So from a political standpoint, this Roman military officer is above Jesus. But perhaps the Roman military officer, being a God-fearer, has heard stories about Jesus, and he says, spiritually, I'm just not worthy. Jesus is a miracle worker. Jesus is a prophet. He's a rabbi. He's a teacher. I'm not worthy to have Jesus come into my house. So both of those things may be going on simultaneously. You know, I don't want to embarrass Jesus, and at the same time, I realize Jesus is so superior to me spiritually that I'm really not worthy to have him come inside my home. We pick up in verse 7, and he says, that is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. So the centurion doesn't seek out Jesus on his own. He sends some Jewish people to seek out Jesus on his behalf. He feels like he's just not up to par spiritually. Maybe he's a Gentile God-fearer who doesn't know a whole lot about the Jewish faith yet. Maybe he's still learning. Maybe he's a newbie. In today's terms, we would say like a new Christian. It's like, okay, I just started reading the Bible 3 weeks ago. I don't know much yet. So he may feel intimidated by having Jesus come to his home. But then this man says something incredible. He says to Jesus through these messengers, but say the word, and my servant will be healed. Are you kidding me? Jesus, you don't even have to come to my house. All you have to do is say the word, and you can heal my servant. So you can heal my servant without touching him, without praying over him. You can heal my servant without even knowing who he is, because you'll never meet him, perhaps. From a distance, Jesus, you can just say the word and healing will take place. Where did this man ever get such an idea? That all Jesus had to do was say words and it would happen. Well, I'm going to take a guess. Part of it might be that he knows the Jewish creation story. The one in Genesis 1 and 2, where God said, let there be light, and there was light. The only thing God had to do was say the words, and things happened. And this man may look at Jesus as a representative of the true God, and if God can speak and things happen, maybe Jesus can speak and things can happen. Talk about faith. Jesus, you don't even have to come to my house. Just say the words, and my servant will be healed. That takes a lot of faith. And then in verse 8, the man's going to give an illustration from his own life. He's a centurion. He's a Roman military officer with as many as 100 people under him. And he's responsible for those 100 people. But at the same time, he's got another officer above him. And the officer above him gives him authority to give orders to those below him. So he understands authority. So he goes on to say, I can say to a soldier, go, and he goes. I can say to a different soldier, come, and he comes. And I can say to a different group of soldiers, do this, and they do it. So the man, in many ways, is saying, I don't even have to be present to make this happen. You know, I can send one of my servants to some of these soldiers and say, hey, your boss said, do this. And they'll do it. And I'm not even present. I just say the words to my servant relays the message, and it happens. And I'm not even there. And in many ways, this is an argument from the lesser to the greater. So the man says, you know, if I can just say words and things happen, how much more can Jesus say words and things happen? I mean, if I can do it, Jesus can do it so much more. So Jesus, I know how this works. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed. When Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. There are 2 times in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is amazed by somebody. This is one of them. And Jesus is amazed at this man's faith. I mean, this is a Gentile. He's not even Jewish. I mean, he didn't grow up hearing all the Jewish stories. He didn't grow up hearing about Moses and the Red Sea. You know, he may not even know those stories. Here's a Gentile man who thinks that if I just say some words, his servant, whom he loves, who's about ready to die, is going to live. Wow. Jesus says, I'm just amazed at that. There's a second time that Jesus is amazed, and we've already read about it in the Gospel of Luke. It's when Jesus went to Nazareth, where there were Jewish people, and they had no faith. Jesus was amazed at their unbelief. How can these Jewish people, having grown up in the tradition of Judaism, having heard the stories, have such little faith? Jesus is amazed at our faith. He's amazed at our lack of faith. And if you're a Gentile reader, you're going, Jesus is amazed at a Gentile in a positive way. And he was amazed at the Jewish people in a negative way. And they're kind of hearing this and turning to the crowd following him. So apparently Jesus turns in such a way that everyone can hear him. He's about to say something important, and he wants everybody to hear it. In fact, Jesus even prefaces his statement by saying, I tell you, which is another way of saying, pay attention. I'm about to say something that you need to hear. So I tell you, I have not found such great faith, even in Israel. And the Gentile readers or hearers are nudging each other. Did you hear that? Jesus thinks this Gentile has more faith than anybody in Israel. Jesus accepts this man because of his faith. And he thinks this man has more faith even than the Jewish people who are the people of God who should have more faith. In other words, this is good news. Jesus welcomes Gentiles if they just have faith in him. which means that we, as Gentile believers in Jesus, need to have that kind of faith in Jesus. And if we do, Jesus will be amazed by our faith as well. Good news for the Gentile readers. You see, the Gentiles struggled with this idea. Why should I put my faith in Jesus as my Messiah, my Savior, when his own Jewish people didn't? In other words, why should I accept Jesus when his own people rejected him? And this message is, yeah, the Jewish people did reject him. In fact, they have a history of rejecting the things of God. But that doesn't keep Gentiles from having faith. So don't let Jewish unbelief keep you from having great faith in Jesus as your Savior, your Messiah. God will accept you on the basis of your faith, even if the Jewish people have no faith. And here's a Gentile man who has more faith than the Jewish people. And so this man becomes kind of a model for believing Gentiles. We need to have that kind of faith. It also sends a great message to the Christian church. You should accept Gentiles who have faith in Jesus because Jesus accepted them. And if Jesus accepted Gentiles on the basis of faith, then you Jewish Christians need to accept Gentiles based upon their faith in Jesus in the same way that Jesus did. So Gentile Christians are not second-class citizens. They're on equal footing with Jewish people who put their faith in Jesus. And what matters is faith in Jesus. And that was a big struggle for the first century church. The big struggle was, how can we accept Gentiles who don't follow the law of Moses? Because they don't. They're not circumcised. They don't observe the Sabbath. They eat whatever they want. They don't follow Jewish food laws. So how can Jewish Christians accept those Gentiles? And the message is, God accepts them on the basis of faith in Jesus. And you should do the same. And that was a big struggle for the first century church. And that story goes a long way toward bringing unity to the church. Very important story for Gentile Christians. Let me finish this up. It doesn't really say, Luke doesn't, what Jesus said. Jesus didn't stop and say a prayer and, ask God to heal the manservant. Doesn't say that anyways. We're not sure what Jesus said, or if Jesus just had a thought and God healed the servant based upon Jesus' thought. We're not told. But we are told that when the men who came to Jesus returned home, they found the servant well. And I think Luke kind of downplays the healing because his main message is not the healing. His main message is Jesus accepted a Gentile on the basis of the man's faith. That's the real point of the story. We move on to story number 2, which is the raising of the widow's son. In the previous story, Jesus is able to bring healing to a person who's on their deathbed. Soon they were going to pass away. And Jesus either spoke a word or did whatever, but the man received healing. The man recovered. He was fine. Now we're going to read about a story about Jesus bringing life to someone who has passed away. And for many of the Jewish people, once the person passes away, they're thinking, well, there's nothing Jesus can do. Oh, yes, there is. Jesus can bring the dead back to life. And that becomes the miracle of this next story. This story is unique to Luke The only place you'll find this story in the Bible is in the Gospel of Luke. You won't find it in Matthew, Mark, or John. It's only in Luke. But we do have other stories of Jesus raising people from the dead. The story of Jairus' daughter, Jesus brought her back to life. And the story of Lazarus in the Gospel of John. Jesus raised him from the dead after he had been dead a few days. So Jesus has the power to bring people back to life after they've died. Now, what's also interesting is that what Jesus does in this story in bringing a young man back to life who's the only son of his mother, who happens to be a widow, is very similar to what Elijah did back in 1 Kings 17 and what Elisha did in 2 Kings chapter 4. Both of those great prophets did something similar. In fact, when Jesus performs this miracle, the people are going to call him a great prophet. Where did they get that language? Well, Jesus is acting just like Elijah. Jesus is acting just like Elisha, our two great prophets in our Hebrew faith. Jesus seems to be doing what they're doing. So Jesus must be a great prophet. He has power over life and death. God is doing great things through Jesus of Nazareth. Well, let's take a look at this story. It begins in Luke chapter 7, verse 11. And Luke begins, soon afterward. Well, soon after Jesus heals the centurion servant, short time after that, Jesus went to a town called Nain, and his disciples and a large crowd went along with him. This is the only time that Nain is mentioned in the entire Bible. And apparently Jesus leaves Capernaum and he travels south to this town called Nain. And it's interesting that Jesus just doesn't go alone, or he just doesn't go with his 12 disciples. Now, there's a large crowd following Jesus. People are just amazed at what Jesus can do. And as Jesus travels from town to town, there's a large crowd that follows him. I have no idea what these people did for a living, because they're not working. They're following Jesus from town to town. And they're amazed at his teachings. They're amazed at his miracles. And Jesus is becoming more and more popular among the Galilean people. Well, I wanted to show you where Nain is located. It's up in Galilee. It's located right here. It's only 6 miles southeast of Nazareth. Jesus grew up in Nazareth. He probably knew about Nain. It was only 6 miles away. And Jesus was up at Capernaum, which is at the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. And chances are he walked from Capernaum to Nain, which was about 25 miles. And people back in New Testament times were in pretty good shape. They could probably do that in about a day. For us to walk 25 miles, we're not walking 25 miles, you know. It's why we have cars, you know. But back then, they had to walk, and it only took them probably a day to end up in this town called Nain. So as Jesus approaches the town, he goes to the town gate. And the town gate is pretty much where everybody hung out. It's where official business was conducted. It's a great place to meet people. But Jesus is about to interrupt a funeral procession. Interesting. A dead person was being carried out. And the idea of being carried out was a technical term for carrying out a corpse for burial. And in Jewish tradition, if you touch a dead person or anything associated with a dead person, you become ceremonially unclean. So in order to keep you from accidentally doing that, they would not bury people inside the village or inside the city. You had to be buried outside the city. So apparently they're carrying this young man out for burial, And they're about to leave the town gate, which means they're about to leave the village to go out into the area surrounding the village where the burial site was located. So you cannot bury people inside the village or the town because you may accidentally walk over them or touch something associated with them and you would be unclean. And in fact, some archaeologists have discovered a burial grounds outside of Nain, just to the southeast of the town. So that's where they went to bury this young man. Now, the young man is then described, the only son of his mother, and she's a widow. That equals a horrible situation in the ancient world. Now, women back in the ancient world, when you were born, you were owned by your father. Your father then arranged your marriage to your husband, who then owned you and took care of you and was to provide for you. And if your husband were to pass away, your oldest son was to take care of you and make sure that all your needs were met. But here's this woman, and she gets married, and her and her husband have one child. The husband then passes away. Now the only child has passed away, which means that this woman is all alone. She has no one to protect her, no one to provide for her. And back in the ancient world, in the first century, it's not like she could just go out and get a job. There weren't too many jobs for women back in the first century. So in many ways, unless another relative takes her in and takes care of her, she's got no one. You know, no life insurance policy because they didn't have those. No Social Security because they didn't have that. She's got zero. And not only that, the family line has now ended. Because the family line always got passed on by the eldest son. This family line is now done. Finished. This is a sad, heartbreaking scene. And here's Jesus. He walks into town, and he's right in the middle of heartbreak. And it says a large crowd from the town was with her. So chances are Nain is a very small village. And everybody in the village knows this woman's child, this young man, has died. And so they all show up to pay their respects, to kind of pledge their support for this woman. In fact, showing up at a funeral, according to Jewish custom, was a work of love. And since this was an only child, there was a lot of mourning. There was a lot of wailing. Back in the ancient world, you would hire professional mourners to help you mourn. Now, you know, if this was an American funeral, you know, they would be walking along and everybody would be looking at the ground and nobody would say a word. I mean, it would be eerily silent. But not in the ancient world. Everybody's mourning, everybody's wailing. This is loud. There's all kinds of confusion, all kinds of emotions being poured out. This was a very chaotic scene that Jesus walks into. And then in verse 13, it says, when the Lord saw her. This is the first time in the gospel that Luke refers to Jesus as Lord in a setting of a story. Now, back in, what Mary had to say and what others had to say, Jesus has been declared to be the Lord, but never in a story and never by Luke. But now Luke refers to Jesus as Lord. Maybe he's trying to connect this story with the previous one because the centurion referred to Jesus as Lord in verse 6. But chances are when the centurion said Lord, he meant sir, meaning a person that I have respect for. But when Luke uses the word Lord, it's the Greek word kurios. He means the Lord God. He means someone who's divine. So Jesus, the Lord, saw her. It's fitting for this story, because we're about to find out that Jesus is the Lord over death. So Jesus sees this woman, and his heart went out to her. I mean, Jesus understood Jewish culture. He grew up in it. And I'm sure that he quickly figured out, oh no, this is the woman's son. And she's a widow. She's got nobody left. I mean, this is heartbreaking. And it breaks Jesus' heart too. And his heart goes out to her. And then Jesus is about to take a couple of actions. He's about to do a couple of things. And the first thing that Jesus is going to do, he's going to address the woman. He's going to speak to her. Because chances are, as he interrupts this funeral procession, the woman is out front. She's the grieving mother in this particular story, who's also a widow. So she's out in front. Jesus would notice her, and so Jesus speaks to her. And Jesus says something interesting, and this is horribly translated. Don't cry. Well, what Jesus really said was, stop weeping or stop crying. I mean, for Jesus to say, don't cry, it's like, too late, Jesus. She's already been weeping and wailing all day long. You know, to tell her not to do something, she's already doing it. And what it really means is you can stop doing that. But wait a second. This is a funeral procession. This is the ancient world. You're supposed to be crying. You're supposed to be wailing. You're supposed to be mourning. And to say that to this woman, she's the person who has the most reason to be grieving right now. And isn't it a little insensitive of Jesus to go up to her and say, stop crying, stop wailing, stop mourning, stop grieving? Well, maybe Jesus just wanted to get her attention. Because in all the chaos, in all the grieving and wailing that's going on, Jesus knows what he wants to do, but he somehow has to get people to calm down long enough for him to do it. So he says to this woman, stop crying. And I'm sure that gets her attention. So I'm sure she looked at him and said, what are you talking about? You know, my son has just died and you're telling me not to weep and mourn? It's what we do. How can I not? Well, don't cry. Stop weeping. That would be a better translation. Then Jesus does a second thing. When they bring the young man out of the town gate, he's lying on a cot. And the cot is here translated a bier. And it's the Greek word saros. And it could be a coffin. A coffin would be enclosed, kind of like we use today. And when you close it, you can't see the dead person. But chances are this is an open bier, which means it's basically a cot that's open. It's a frame or a stand in which a corpse or a coffin containing it is laid before the burial. And I found a picture online, and you can see the cot. Looks like it's made out of wood. Looks like it has some ropes around it. And it would be carried by as many as 4 men, one on each of the corners. And maybe the ropes were tied around the dead body because you don't want to be carrying the corpse out. There's no paved road. Somebody could slip and do one of these numbers, and all of a sudden you've got the corpse on the ground. And that would be embarrassing, and that would be horrible. So the ropes were probably to tie him down so that he doesn't move, doesn't fall off. And he's not wearing a shroud in this picture, but chances are originally he was. And Jesus goes up and he touches this cot, this bier. Jesus just became ceremonially unclean. And the Jewish people were kind of looking around going, who is he? Why did he just do that? And the four men who are carrying this thing, the pallbearers, we would call them, they kind of come to a screeching halt. And all the wailing probably stops, and all the eyes are now looking at Jesus, going, what are you doing? And we really don't know if the people in Nain had heard of Jesus. We don't know if they knew who he was or even if they'd heard rumors about him. But there was this man who just interrupted the funeral by telling the grieving mother not to cry anymore, by touching the cot and becoming unclean. And everybody just kind of stops, wondering what Jesus is going to do. Well, Jesus looks at the young man. So now we know that this is a young man who has died. And he says, young man, because Jesus doesn't even know his name, I say to you, get up. Now it's interesting. When Jesus shows up, nobody asks Jesus to do anything. Maybe they don't ask because they don't know who he is. Or maybe they don't ask because they're thinking, he's dead. I mean, there's nothing Jesus can do. Now, if Jesus would have been here 2 days ago, we would have asked Jesus to come and heal this young man. But now that he's died, nobody can do anything, not even Jesus. So nobody asked Jesus to do anything. Jesus takes the initiative to do something. Why? He has a heart of compassion. He takes one look at that grieving mother and decides, I'm going to do something. Going to do something they're not even going to see coming. And just like the faith of the centurion, all Jesus has to do is speak. He doesn't have to perform a ceremony. He doesn't have to go through a ritual. He just needs to say some words, like one sentence. Young man, I say to you, get up. The dead man sat up. Actually, the dead man did not sit up. Dead people do not sit up. Dead people do not begin to talk. It's the dead man who's now alive who sets up. And he begins to talk. And if there's any evidence whatsoever that the cure has taken place, that a resurrection from life, a raising back to life has taken place, he sets up and he begins to talk. And I found another picture, which is different from the previous picture, different guy, but again, you can see the cot that he was on. And look at that facial expression on the young man who's now alive. Because think about it. The last thing he remembers is family members coming in and saying goodbye, telling him, you're not going to make it. You're going to pass away. And then he does. And now his next memory is, I'm alive. I'm setting up on this cot. And why am I on this cot? And where are you taking me? And who is that guy? And what did he just do? And he's just looking at Jesus with this puzzled look on his face going, what did you just do? I'm healthy. I'm alive. I'm feeling pretty good here. In fact, I'm feeling so well, I think I can get off of this cot and walk around on my own. And back in verse 15, it said that Jesus gave him back to his mother. That heart of compassion that Jesus has. Here's your boy. He can now take care of you. And one day he can get married. And he and his wife can have a son and carry on the family name. And that grandson can help take care of you later in life as well. A heart of compassion. And it's interesting, the response of the people who saw this. They respond like they were in the very presence of God. Because it says, they were all filled with awe, holy terror, holy fear. It's like, what just happened? I mean, we were having a funeral service, and this guy comes and interrupts the whole thing, and then he raises the corpse. Wow. God has shown up in our little village. God has just done something incredible. And it's kind of like, whoa. And they began to praise God. God did this. This young man is alive. His mother's going to be cared for. Wow, what a miracle. And then they called Jesus a great prophet. Well, the term is really not adequate. Jesus is more than just a great prophet. He's the Messiah. He's the Son of God. He's God the Son. But the best term they could come up with, great prophet. These are Jewish people. They've probably heard the story about Elijah. They've probably heard the story about Elisha. And Jesus has done something similar. Jesus is a great prophet, just like Elijah and Elisha. Wow. And in their terms, that was big. There are bigger terms, but they didn't know those. Like Messiah, Son of God. They're not going to figure that out till later. God has come to help his people. God has come to do something great for his people. And we have just witnessed something that we're going to remember for the rest of our lives. We have just witnessed something that we're going to talk about for the rest of our lives. They're not quite sure who Jesus is, but God has just shown up in their lives and done something great. Ever had that happen? You know, you prayed and God showed up and God did something and you're going, wow, that was God. You know, that wasn't modern medicine, that was God. You know, I spoke to this person and next thing I know, they found me a job. Bumped into this person, introduced to this person. Now I've been married to them for 40, 50, 60 years. It was a God thing. God did something incredible. And it concludes with the news about Jesus spread throughout Judea and the surrounding country. I bet it did. Because everybody who witnessed that story, you're not going to believe this. You know, we were having a funeral, and this guy interrupted it by raising the corpse. I mean, that just doesn't happen every day. I mean, that's one of those things you imagine. Well, you know, wouldn't it be cool? You know, we went to this funeral and, you know, and all of a sudden the corpse comes back to life. Okay, that only happens in the movies. And when Jesus shows up and does something incredible. Jesus has compassion for a widow. Many in Jewish society would have just written this woman off. Not Jesus. He has compassion, and he restores her son and restores her life. That's the kind of compassion that Jesus has for you too. So whatever you're struggling with, Jesus cares. He has compassion for his people. Heavenly Father, thank you for this incredible story. An incredible story where Jesus shows up and everything changes. Father, we look forward to that in our lives as well. When Jesus shows up in our circumstances and all of a sudden everything changes. Father, thank you that Jesus cares, that he has compassion. And in the middle of his compassion, he's willing to do something incredible. Father, thank you for that. And we have our own stories of what you have done in our lives. And we look forward to more stories of you showing up and doing something incredible. May our faith be like the faith of the centurion. Oh, Jesus just has to say the word and everything will be fine. May we have that kind of faith, I pray, in Jesus' name. Amen.